here for a while.
Well, we could see Anuraag just Snapcaster Mage on turn 2, just ambush Viper it up. Who knows? But again, we've got Daryl on lands. Anuraag is going to be on Miracles. Both players are 1-0, so they're off to a good start. And I'm actually a little excited to see this play out. I enjoy watching the lands deck, but most of the time I'm beating them with show and tell. So let's see how it works here against Miracles. Anuraag's going to lead off with a Flooded Strand, go down to 19, get a beautiful Beta Island, and he's going to play a Sensei's Divining Top.
One of my favorite island artworks for the non-full card and pictures.
So Daryl's going to very quickly find a Taiga, go down to 19 from his fetch land, play a Mana Bond, and Anuraag's going to fall to 18 and Force of Will that bad boy. Definitely is not going to want Daryl to just be able to put all the lands from his hand onto the battlefield. The drawback is he has to discard his hand. Oops, doesn't matter. There's 34 lands in my deck.
Yeah, the other thing too is Anuraag, he just doesn't have that many targets for Force of Will. Daryl's deck is mostly lands, as its namesake, and it doesn't have that many cards for Anuraag to counter. So he kind of just takes the opportunity, use that Force of Will on something reasonable, and the turn 1 Mana Bonds is really going to jumpstart Daryl's game plan. So it's certainly a good target for a Force.
So Anuraag is just going to go ahead and ponder, shuffle, find a Flooded Strand, and use it to get a basic Plains and just play another Sensei's Divining Top, falling down to 17 in the process. Passing back to Daryl, who it looks like has a Rishadan Port, and is going to cast a Life from the Loam, targeting his Verdant Catacombs.
So certainly not a particularly powerful play there, but now that Loam is in the graveyard, Daryl will be able to dredge it, fill up his graveyard, and essentially use it as an engine to just churn through his deck, find all the lands he could ever want, and some of them are going to be able to lock Anuraag out of the game and win the game for Daryl.
So it looks like Anuraag was able to find a copy of Brainstorm for his turn, but he didn't find very much, just a basic mountain. All these beta lands are looking very good. Daryl's going to go ahead and dredge his Life from the Loam, but hit 0 lands on the dredge.
Yeah, pretty unfortunate. I mean, his deck is mostly lands. He has 34 lands in the deck. Over half of his deck is lands. So the fact that he didn't hit any is a little unfortunate. He still has that fetch land in his hand. So if he really wants to get 1 land in the graveyard, he can. But we'll see if he has anything more productive to do this turn.
So it looks like we're going to start off with an Exploration from Daryl for the turn. Let's see if Anuraag has any response. He's going to spin his top.
And again, Anuraag wouldn't mind countering this. He doesn't have very many targets to counter, and this is just going to be a good way for Daryl to accelerate his game plan by having this Exploration on the board.
So Daryl's going to go ahead and play his Verdant Catacombs and use it first land for the turn. He's going to fall down to 18.
So one thing that's a little interesting about this matchup is usually both decks are looking to be the control deck. Both of them are very, very slow. Both of them are based on locking their opponent out of the game and establishing control of the board. So it's a little interesting when you have 2 control decks run into each other, especially when they're of completely different varieties. I think generally speaking, the matchup is a little in favor of Daryl. The Miracles deck isn't usually that well equipped to interact with what Daryl's doing. And Daryl, and the Miracles deck just has very, very few ways to win the game. So usually the game is going to draw out for a really long time, and Daryl typically has a little bit more inevitability.
So Daryl's going to play his Maze of Ith for his second land here, and we're going to see an interesting play where he's going to use a crop rotation to sacrifice the Maze of Ith, and he's going to go get a Thespian Stage. So it looks like we're going to use a Rishadan Port and Anuraag's upkeep.
And so a lot of people know from other control matchups that one of the ways to get an edge is to just hit more land drops. And you can see that sort of play out in this match, because not only does Daryl have Life from the Loam to make it so that he's going to hit a land drop every single turn and get ahead on mana that way, but in addition to that, he has ports and he has wastelands. So he can really choke off Anuraag from being able to work with all of his resources, whereas in a really late game scenario, Daryl's going to have so much mana, and particularly with Punishing Fire and Dark Depths, he's going to be able to finish the game off when he has, essentially infinite mana.
So Daryl's going to go ahead and dredge his Life from the Loam here, and he's going to cast it. Now, he did hit a Thespian Stage on the dredge, and it looks like he already has a Dark Depths in his hand. So with his 2 land drops here, he can go ahead and play Thespian Stage and Dark Depths, and aim to make a 20/20 on Anuraag's end step.
Yeah, and so what's tricky about that normally is that 2020, it could just get Swords to Plowshares. But with that Rishadan port, Daryl can tap Anuraag's planes, cutting him off from white mana, and then go for the 2020 and potentially just kill in one hit while Anuraag is choked on mana.
So it's looking like Daryl is just going to play another stage and a Wasteland, and I think he's just going to wait another turn or two so that he can actually do that, tap down some white sources, make a 2020, and then send that Jerry Thompson token into the red zone.
Yeah, and currently the reason that Daryl is tapping down the island is because a lot of the times Anuraag may have cards like Ponder. Daryl knows that he could fire off a Brainstorm, but the other big card that Daryl doesn't want to resolve is Counterbalance. Counterbalance can be a little bit of a problem if Daryl wants to try to win with Punishing Fire, and in general would just like to keep the card off the board. Also, Jace can be another pretty powerful card if Anuraag has access to 2 blue.
So it looks like Daryl is not going to tap a land in Anuraag's upkeep. And even though Anuraag's been spinning these tops, he has just not been able to find any lands. So it looks like he did finally find a Scalding Tarn. So he's going to have a couple white sources here when Daryl decides to go for tapping some lands down. But this still looks like it's going to be an uphill battle for Anuraag.
So that fetch land is really good for a couple of reasons. Not only does it make it so that Anuraag can still have a white mana, even if Daryl tries to port his planes, but it also means that he's going to be able to shuffle his deck and be able to see a fresh new card, 3 new cards with his Sensei's Divining Top. Sensei's Divining Top and fetch lands is pretty similar to Brainstorm and fetch lands.
So Daryl's just going to go ahead and use his Windswept Heath. He's going to tap, targeting the Scalding Tarn. So he does have a Wasteland here, so he's going to be able to waste if he gets a second white source, but it looks like he's just going to get a Plains.
So one thing that Daryl can build up to is even though he only has 1 port now, he has 2 Thespian stages. So as he hits more land drops, he's going to be able to copy his port with the Thespian stage, and that looks like what he's doing right now. And now he's going to be able to really choke Anuraag off mana.
So Daryl's going to go ahead and, again, copy that port with the Thespian stage. He's going to cycle a Tranquil Thicket and dredge the Life from the Loam, hitting a bunch more lands.
Notably Punishing Fire and Grove of the Burn Willows, which is essentially a 2-card combo that allows Daryl to essentially machine gun things down, including Anuraag's life total.
Yeah, so we can do 2 damage with the Grove, or with the Punishing Fire, tap the Grove for a red mana, give his opponent a life, trigger Punishing Fire, use the red mana to return it back to his hand, and each iteration is going to net 2 damage.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
1 damage.
One of the worst ways to lose, because it's just
so slow.
Yeah, it's like someone taking a thumbtack or something and just poking you over and over and over again.
So it looks like Daryl's picked up a copy of Gamble. So let's see what he decides that he wants to gamble for, if anything.
And you can really see how far ahead Daryl is on lands. I mean, Anuraag has certainly had some land drop problems, but in a control mirror, just having more lands than your opponent usually allows you to reign supreme. And I don't think this is going to be a scenario that's any different.
So Anuraag's gone ahead and cast a Snapcaster Mage, flashing back a Brainstorm on Daryl's end step. He looks like he is able to draw into some more lands. There's a Tundra there.
So really what you're saying, though, is he's got a clock.
He does have a clock.
He's got the Ambush Viper. Gabby Sparts would be proud.
But these clocks are, I don't know, not really going to do much if Daryl's able to just get a 2020 into play and win.
Oh, so you're saying a 2-1's not good enough?
Against the 2020? Unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
All right.
At least it's a plan.
No fear here. We're going to attack with Snapcaster Mage. Anuraag might have brainstormed into a Jace.
Ooh, that would be good. The problem is if he taps out, he may just die. So a lot of what Daryl does, Anuraag can't really interact with, and this is especially true if he's has no mana.
Well, there's a counterbalance. So it looks like we're going to get 2 planes are going to get tapped down.
And Daryl's moving pretty quickly. I think he knows that he's just going to win right now. Yep.
Make a 2020.
And as soon as Daryl goes for the extra white mana, Anuraag sees the writing on the wall, and Daryl's going to smash his face in for 20, and Anuraag is just going to save himself 2 minutes and start his sideboarding.
Now, I do want to point out that game went 7 or 8 turns.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
And if Anuraag had put a Snapcaster Mage on the battlefield on turn 2, it might have got there.
All he needed was a turn 2 Grizzly Bear, and it would have been game.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboards here for our players as they go into their sideboarding action. Anuraag has 2 Monastery Mentor, 2 Red Elemental Blast, 2 Vendilion Click, 2 copies of Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Wear and Tear, 2 Blood Moons, a Pyroblast, a Containment Priest, and a Surgical Extraction. What do we think Anuraag's going to go with?
So I think Anuraag is going to be looking to take out quite a few cards. Basically, all of his counter spells are pretty weak in the matchup. And the cards that I think he's going to want to bring in are 2 Monastery Mentor, just so he has a bit more business and put a clock on Daryl. Vendilion Click, also for the same reason. We may see Wear and Tear, because Daryl has some powerful enchantments that can really accelerate his game plan. Blood Moon is also a really good card because it essentially just neuters Daryl's entire deck. I mean, Daryl's deck is based on lands that do things, and if you change all those lands into basic mountains, that's going to be a really big problem. Containment Priest, I believe, has some utility against the Dark Depths combo. And although I might be wrong with that, but I believe it does. And then also, Anuraag can bring in Surgical Extraction, because as we saw with Life from the Loam, you can tag Life from the Loam, or you'll see a lot of Daryl's key pieces hit the graveyard before they hit play, and Surgical Extraction is going to be a good card for just completely taking those out of the picture.
Yeah, in fact, if Anuraag is able to extract Punishing Fire and Dark Depths using a Snapcaster Mage, Daryl actually can't win.
Yeah, Daryl will not be able to. And Daryl will likely mill himself out with Life from the Loam, depending on where we are at that game.
So on Daryl's side, we have 4 Croson Grip, 4 Sphere of Resistance, 2 Chalice of the Void, 2 copies of Boil. A little spicy action. We got a Bajuka Bog, 1 Boseiju who shelters all, and 1 Thorn of Amethyst. How do you think Daryl's going to side?
Well, we were talking about powerful sideboard cards, and Boil is just a dirty card. If Daryl casts Boil, I hope there's a shower in the convention room, because he's going to need to clean himself off. But the cards that I think are going to be brought in are, I think, Croson Grip. It can tag Blood Moon, it can tag Counterbalance, it can tag Top. So that's going to be just all-around great card against the Miracles game plan. Boil, for sure. I think that he might bring in Boseiju, but I'm not 100% sure. What spells would he really want to cast off of it?
Mainly Life from the Loam and Punishing Fire, it seems that he's able to cast. Yeah,
it seems like he'll bring it in. And then I don't know if he'll want to go into the Disruption package of Sphere of Resistance, Chalice of the Void, Thorn of Amethyst. I don't think he will, because the Miracles deck usually has quite a bit of mana to work with, and it seems like Daryl already has enough cards to bring in. So I think it'll just be the Croson Grip, the Boils, and the Boseijus, but it'll be interesting to see if he brings in those artifacts.
So while our players finish up sideboarding here, let's go ahead and just talk about the StarCityGames.com newsletter.
Oh, sounds great.
I actually really love the newsletter. In fact, I used to write for the newsletter. I do every now and then. I know that you are going to be doing some pieces for the newsletter coming up.
Yeah, the subcomp for March. It's going to be all me, baby.
But the newsletter is your source for Magic the Gathering news.
Yeah, I mean, it has a lot of great stuff. I mean, it talks about the tour. It talks, usually there'll be a match of the week to look at. It'll give you good ideas for deck lists to play, whether it's for your FNM or you're going to an upcoming Star City event. There's always the Cardboard Crack comic, which is really, really fun. And it'll just kind of catch you up on all the recent events. So if you're just looking for one thing that's going to basically always keep you up to date, you have a lot on your social media feed and you just kind of want to narrow it down a little bit, the newsletter is really good for that. It's a pretty efficient way of getting information.
And you can sign up absolutely for free. Go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. Again, free. You don't have to pay anything for it.
Yep, free Star City stuff.
Just knowledge in your eye holes, your eyeballs. You got to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and jump back. We got Daryl Ayers against Anuraag Das. Daryl is up a game with lands. Anuraag is on Miracles. He's down a game for those of you who have just joined us. And the first game was pretty interesting, but I feel like that's kind of what happens in this matchup. The lands deck gets out ahead, with all of its different spells that allows it to put multiple lands onto the battlefield. And there just isn't a lot that Anuraag can do to stop Daryl from making a 2020.
Yeah, that game was a little bit more condensed than what you would normally see. Anuraag was missing land drops, so Daryl was able to get ahead on mana sooner and then as soon as Daryl gets ahead on mana, then he's able to win. But that's essentially the formula. Anuraag, he doesn't have, well, particularly game one, he doesn't have really the good interaction that he wants. Daryl is free to get ahead on mana, and then whenever that happens, whether it's early or late, Daryl will usually be able to win the game. But the post-board games should be a lot more interesting. The Miracles deck, like any classic control or mid-range deck, is going to have better post-board configurations than it does have pre-board configurations. So Anuraag's got a lot more to bring to the table, and these post-board games should be a lot closer.
Now, we did joke a lot leading into the match about how these are two glacially slow decks and to strap in for a long one. But you could tell from the pace of play of both players in game one how fast they sideboarded. They are both very familiar with these decks, and they're looking to not take up more time than is absolutely needed to finish these games of Magic.
Yeah, one of the classic things you need to worry about in any of these long tournaments is getting draws, and these are two of the decks that you are likely to get draws with. So whenever you sleeve one of these decks up, you have to just say to yourself, I need to play quickly, otherwise I will get draws. It's just as simple as that. And a draw really is as bad as a loss. So when both these players are very experienced with these decks, have played them at a lot of tournaments, and you're going to see their pace of play be very appropriate to that situation.
So Anuraag is going to lead off with a Scalding Tarn and pass. Daryl's just going to go ahead and cast a Mox Diamond. And when it enters the battlefield, he has to discard a land or sacrifice it, so he pitches a Grove of the Burn Willows. Just going to play a Rishadan Port for the turn and pass back to Anuraag, who's again Scalding Tarn and pass. Daryl here is going to tap a Scalding Tarn on Anuraag's end step just to prompt him into fetching. That way he's not going to be able to use that shuffle to reset the top of his deck with a Divining Top later on in the game, be able to cash in with a Brainstorm. And if he happens to go get a non-basic land, Daryl might be able to fire up a Wasteland if he has one in his hand.
Yeah, and that Mox Diamond is just another one of the ways that Daryl gets ahead on mana. I mean, if you want to just break things down into one metric, that is essentially how Daryl wins this matchup, is by having more mana.
So Anuraag has gone ahead and just fetched a basic island. Daryl cycled his Tranquil Thicket and is just going to play a Rishadan Port and pass. Now, he does have a Chalice of the Void in his hand, so he could have played it for one, but that shuts off a lot of the cards that's in his own deck. So I imagine that he might be waiting to try and play it on two to shut off something like Counterbalance. Anuraag's just going to go ahead and pass after he plays an island and gets his island tapped down by Daryl's Rishadan Port. And now we move into Daryl's turn 3, and let's see what he has to bring to the table.
So Chalice on turn 2 is really good. It not only is able to deal with Counterbalance, it also deals with Predict, it also deals with potential Counterspell, it also deals with Snapcaster Mage. So I think that's probably the target. I think right now he's going to look for a better place to play it, though, one where he can get his opponent to be tapped out.
So he's just going to play a Thespian Stage and pass, use his ports to tap down 2 islands and Anuraag's upkeep. Anuraag's just going to play another fetch land and pass back to Daryl, and it looks like neither player really has a whole lot going on, but Anuraag does have a Jace in his hand, which could end up taking over the game if he's ever able to cast it. But he also has a Blood Moon, which is big game.
Yeah, really big game, especially because Daryl does not have access to mana to cast Croson Grip, or Abrupt Decay, excuse me.
Looks like he has a Mox Diamond and a Croson Grip in his hand, so he actually would still be able to have an answer to a Blood Moon if it were to come to that, but I still like seeing it in play.
Yeah. And it looks like Daryl's going to be opening himself up to Blood Moon, but it's not really that bad considering he has that Mox. That Mox is going to keep green mana available, and he'll be able to kill the Blood Moon whenever he wants.
Now, it looks like Anuraag just picked up a copy of Force of Will, and he has a 4th untapped land here, so I think he's just going to jam a Jace and try and win that way.
Yeah, and that's a pretty reasonable way to win. The Lansec has a pretty hard time with Planeswalkers. They don't really have many good ways to attack it. They can use the Punishing Fire combo to whittle it down, but that takes a lot of mana, especially if the Jace is ticking up. And they can do it with the 2020, but Daryl is pretty far from assembling that.
So it looks like Anuraag is just going to go ahead and slam this Blood Moon instead of laying his Jace. We know that Daryl has Croson Grip in hand, and so obviously we're leaning more towards the Jace play there. But I feel like Daryl doesn't have enough going on right now to prompt me to not play the Jace when I can, and I can still play Blood Moon even through some ports next turn if I need to.
Right. The thing is, the Jace is going to accrue value the longer it sits on the board, so it's good to play it earlier. Whereas the Blood Moon, it can lock your opponent out of the game, but Daryl isn't doing a whole lot this turn. hasn't been doing very much the past couple turns, and it's not unreasonable to assume he's not going to do very much the following turn. So waiting on the Blood Moon also seems reasonable to me.
Now, it looks like Anuraag has a second copy of Blood Moon in his hand, which could end up being good for us. Daryl's going to use a crop rotation in response to a
counterbalance,
and I have to imagine, that Anuraag is going to play another Blood Moon. So that is very good. That crop rotation did need to be countered.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Force of Will on the Chalice.
Since Plow is shut off, if he happens to go get like a Dark Depths and then kill the Blood Moon, he'd be able to make a 20/20.
Yeah, shouldn't his own Chalice counter the crop rotation? Isn't crop rotation 1 mana?
Oh, yeah, that is true.
Well, it looks like his opponent forgot about it and just forced anyway.
Yeah, his opponent forced, but that's not his opponent's trigger.
Right.
So we'll go ahead and see what needs to happen there for us. But
yeah, I'm sure they'll work it out. But this Jace is going to be really powerful. The Jace, like I said before, it's really hard for Daryl to interact with it. Daryl is not ahead on mana, so there's really not that much he can do. And the Jace is one of Anuraag's better ways to win the game. Also to generate card advantage if he wants, but it looks like right now he's playing it aggressively, ticking it up, is going to go for that ultimate, and that's not going to take that long to win the game.
Yeah, so it looks like we see Jace is on the battlefield. It's going to be working.
Looks like they may be working out the Chalice right now with the Judge.
In the meantime, it looks like Daryl is just going to scoop it up in the face of that Jace.
Yeah, it might have been also just Daryl doesn't want to get draws. He knows that game 3 could be really long. He feels that this game is basically just over. He just doesn't have anything going on. He's facing Blood Moons and Jaces. So, that's a smart move on Daryl. Like we were talking about before, draws are a real thing. You just kind of want to speed through these games as fast as possible. And you want to finish a match early if you can, just to have a chance to get some food.
Not only that, but in that situation, I guess technically it's a non-zero chance that Daryl loses that game.
Yeah.
But the odds of him winning are so low that it's worth conceding to not give Anuraag the information from looking at the top card of his library.
Yeah, that's also true. With that Jace, Anuraag is just going to be able to keep peeking at what kind of cards Daryl has in his deck, might get a peek at some of the sideboard cards. I'm sure Anuraag would love to know if Daryl has a card like Boil or how many Croson Grips he has. So keeping that information secret is also quite relevant, especially because these games are likely to go quite long and you're going to see a lot of the cards in your deck. So having the knowledge that your opponent has a 1 of or 2 of out of the sideboard, I think it's basically bottom line is keeping the information a secret is good, saving time is good also.
So Anuraag is going to go ahead and even the matchup 1-1 here against Daryl. He is on Miracles, Daryl Ayers is on Lands. Like you said, Daryl's been playing this deck for quite some time, and we do have a player profile for Daryl Ayers since he is a fixture on our SCG tour. He is 22. He is from Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Look at that smile.
I know.
Award-winning smile in that picture.
He has 4 open top 8s. He does have 1 open win. Legacy Open again last time we were in Philly.
Wow, it's a returning champion.
He is.
Did we highlight that yet?
We did.
Oh, perfect. Man, I guess you highlighted it.
I did. He's currently studying computer science in college. His first name is actually Steven, but goes by Daryl. I did not know that. I'm going to start calling him Steven. I wonder why he goes by Daryl. Maybe he's just like a really big Walking Dead fan.
Probably because he just doesn't like the name Steven, so maybe I wouldn't call him that.
And he has a personalized license plate that reads Goulet.
Really?
I hope that he is like paying, royalties.
Yeah, royalties to Huey Jensen or
to Huey and Owen. I mean, I guess BBD can even get in on that since he's kind of taken the term for himself.
Yeah.
But a personalized license plate that says Goulet. I'm surprised it doesn't just say Lands.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back here for Game 3. Daryl's going to be on the play. He's going to sacrifice his Misty Rainforest Fall into 19 and go find a Taiga. And I have to imagine he's going to play one of the bevy of 1-mana spells that he has in his deck.
It looks like you are right. So this is definitely going to be a good start. Daryl just, like we were saying, like I've been harping on this whole match, he just wants to get ahead on mana.
So we've got an exploration here from Daryl's. Anuraag is going to use a Force of Will. You just got to get it in where it fits in. There's
Right.
not many spots for him to use that Force of Will. He's going to pitch a Ponder, fall to 19 from the cost, take his turn. He just has a basic island and a Sensei's Divining Top. So it looks like this is the type of game that Anuraag wants to play. He just needs to get that Jace on the battlefield that's sitting in his hand.
Yeah, and who needs Ponder when you have Sensei's Divining Top?
I mean, I like Ponder.
Yeah, I do too, but I always find it interesting with what you discard with your Force of Will. A lot of the times, I do prefer to discard the weaker cantrips when I have the option, just because the other cards are my real business spells.
Yeah.
You know, if I discard them to a Force of Will, then I have to find them again later on with the Ponder.
So it looks like Daryl is just going to play a Wasteland and Life from the Loam back his Mystery Enforce and pass. Anuraag has a Scalding Tarn and passes back to Daryl, so we're going into Daryl's turn 3 here. Looks like he has a couple copies of Gamble, but I think he's just going to sit on a potential Croson Grip if he has it in his hand.
Yeah, one thing that's a little annoying for Daryl is he's got the Wasteland right here, and choking off his opponent's mana is certainly part of his game plan. Miracles is one of the unique decks in the format, similar to the Death and Taxes deck that we saw, that actually has a fair number of basics. Most decks in Legacy do not play very many basics. A lot of decks you'll see, like a lot of the Delver decks, are mono dual lands. You know,
Yeah.
so the fact that Daryl has one of his land destruction cards and isn't able to use it is a little unfortunate for him.
So Anuraag is just going to play a basic island and pass back to Daryl. Daryl's going to use his Mystery Enforce on his end step, fall to 18, get a basic forest. That way he has a way to cast Croson Grip if Anuraag happens to land something like a Blood Moon. But let's see what our course of action is here. Ooh, and here's a gamble. We're gonna
Let's
roll it
the
up.
dice.
I love this card.
Yeah.
I love it. I feel like I just want this card in every format.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really cool card. I mean, Daryl is cheating a little bit because he has Life from the Loam in his deck, but this is just a good example of just flavor matching up perfectly with the function.
I mean, this is a Red Mage's card.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when we talk about Chandra, I picture her sitting in a casino,
Gambling.
flipping coins,
Yep.
playing roulette.
Yeah.
Like, Gamble is a Red Mage's card. So we've got a Thespian stage here. We don't quite know what Daryl went and found with his Gamble since he did it so quickly.
That is part of the fun of it.
Ooh, but here comes a Predict.
So Predict is a pretty good card. The first person that I saw playing Predict was Reed Duke, although I'm sure there was someone playing it before him. But having an instant speed way to generate card advantage is really valuable, and typically the options are a little too expensive, a little too clunky. The Predict requires a little bit of setup, but since you're playing Brainstorm and Sensei's Divining Top, it's a little easier. And with the Miracles deck, all you want to do is just pass the turn with all of your mana, but if your opponent doesn't do anything, you've wasted all of your mana, and wasting your mana is never good, whether you're playing a control deck or not. So having a couple of Predicts in your deck as a proactive way to use your mana and also generate card advantage is really perfect.
So he's able to predict the Predict that was on top of his deck, Predictception, and then find a mountain, spin his top, and so it looks like we've got Thespian Stage has copied Basic Forest to give him protection through Blood Moon, and Anuraag looks like he's in a good spot here with top and counterbalance.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Daryl can battle through this. Essentially, both of them have been playing fair in that Daryl hasn't been able to accelerate any of his lands out, and Anuraag's been able to hit all of his land drops thanks to that top. So right now they're pretty even-toed, but that Boseiju could be a problematic card for Anuraag.
Yeah, that Boseiju will allow Daryl to cast his Life from the Loam once he decides to start dredging it here. But he also does have a Croson Grip in his hand. I think he's just kind of sitting on the right spot to be able to use it.
Yeah, casting Life from the Loam over and over again with Boseiju seems a little treacherous. I mean, Anuraag doesn't pressure Daryl's life total that much, but he does have a few Snapcaster mages, and Daryl doesn't have infinite life, so casting Life from the Loam with Boseiju a couple times certainly seems reasonable, but it doesn't seem like a long-term game plan to me.
Now he also can use that Boseiju to cast his Croson Grip. So even though Croson Grip has split second, counterbalance will still trigger.
Yeah, he won't be able to set it up with the top, but Anuraag may have the forethought to try to keep a 3 floating on his top, on the top of his library, like a Blood Moon. I doubt he still has Terminus in his deck, but he may just have 1 or 2 for just for this sort of occasion. So certainly a worthwhile thing to do just to guarantee that croissant grip, but not the case in this scenario.
So now it looks like we're going to have to try and do something to fight through this Jace. So Daryl's just going to use croissant grip. Ooh, Anuraag's going to catch it with a surgical extraction.
And now we really see the sideboard cards playing a big role here. I mean, croissant grip was the best thing Daryl could have to basically beat one of the cornerstones of the Miracles deck. And now Anuraag is able to swing back with a... did he just pause on a boil?
Yeah, he paused and pulled it out and read it.
Yeah, I have to imagine he just blurted out an "oh geez" when he saw that.
So it looks like Anuraag's going to get those copies of Croissant Grip out of Daryl's deck. He's going to take one more look back through, reread Boil. I think he's going to count the boils.
And so it looks like he brought in the artifacts. I mean, those are spheres of resistance right there. So it looks like Daryl is pretty big on the mana denial plan.
And there were 4 copies of Croissant Grip, so he did bring them all in.
Yeah.
Anuraag, again, is just going to take another look back through here just to see what we've got going on. A bunch of lands. Daryl's deck's full of real estate. But the big thing is that there's not going to be a whole lot for Daryl to try and fight that Jace.
Yeah, so that's the thing is both decks are sort of in a race scenario. It's not the normal race that you see between 2 burn decks, but both of them are racing to build their mana, and then once they have a lot of mana, they're going to be looking to end the game. But now that Anuraag has been able to pick a spot to land a Jace, he is going to be able to end the game pretty soon if Daryl doesn't do anything. So now the pressure's really on Daryl. Daryl can't just patiently play his lands. He really needs to get the ball rolling.
So Daryl's going to go ahead and dredge his life from the loam. And he has to do something here in a hurry. He's got, 4 or 5 turns until this Jace just wins the game.
Yeah, the good thing is he's set up to potentially win the game rather quickly. Anuraag only has 1 white source at the moment. That may change with Jace. But Daryl can potentially, if he finds a port and a Dark Depths, Daryl can potentially port the white source and then Thespian stage the depths and kill Anuraag basically out of nowhere.
So he's going to go ahead and Mox Diamond, discarding the Grove of the Burn Willows. Now we're going to see a gamble here, which I have to imagine is going to hit something like Dark Depths.
Yeah.
But we're going to flip a coin here. My favorite part of the game.
Yep. It really is just 50-50 chance. So one thing that'll be interesting to see is if Anuraag can find a Snapcaster Mage. And there's the Dark Depths that we kind of expected he would get.
He's going to play his Dark Depths for the turn and then pass. Now, he can't really just do this on his turn and pass because then Anuraag can minus the Jace to bounce it. He does have to be wary of the white source that's on Anuraag's side of the battlefield, as it looks like he does have a copy of Swords to Plowshares in his hand. But Anuraag's going to pick up a Ponder for the turn and cast it, and there is that Snapcaster Mage. So he can snap and get rid of the life from the loam right now if he wants to.
Yeah, and then Daryl would be forced to just top deck a Rishadan port. So it seems like the good things that Anuraag can do at this point are Snapcaster, the extraction, but also Anuraag probably wants to find more white mana. The one way that Daryl can win the game is by getting this 20/20 onto the board, and Anuraag wants to have multiple sources of white mana so that he can't have them ported too easily.
So he's just going to pass the turn back, and he's going to make a 20/20.
Wow, this is going to be devastating. So this is going to open up a line of play. I don't know if Anuraag's going to take it, but he's going to be able to now Snapcaster the surgical extraction and get all the Dark Depths out of Daryl's deck.
And it looks like he did side out his Punishing Fire, so Daryl just had 0 ways to win left.
Wow, so that's pretty insane. Really well played on Anuraag's part. Also, a great example of seeing how the sideboard cards really played a pivotal role in that matchup. In Game 1, Anuraag just really didn't have a good way to interact with what Daryl was doing, but we saw the Blood Moons being really, really effective, and we also saw the surgical extraction be essentially the thing that won the match for him.
It's actually very